So this is one of my favorite topics in the Revolutionary War because when I left you last, Charleston was gone to the British, right? And so we all know how this ends. We're Americans, right? You're not British. I'm not British. I'm an American, and we've had a country now for a long time. More than several hundred years. And so we know that the Patriots are going to win this. But if we didn't know that, if we were aliens from another planet and we had landed here and we're reading this history for the first time, we might wonder, looks like the British are going to win this and the colonies are going to stay colonies. So what changes? Well, here's what changes. It's something called militia warfare, and militia is right there, okay? And another term for this is guerrilla warfare. Not the gorilla like the big gorilla you see in the jungles, but guerrilla, G-U-E, and that's a type of fighting, okay? So here's the thing about the British, and I want you to think about this, and I'm going to stand up. The British, they marched, and they carried their muskets and their rifles over their arms, and they would march in lines, and then they would see their enemy out there across the field, and they would meet, and there'd be a big space in between them, and their generals would say, ready, aim, fire, and they would turn those muskets, and they would fire a shot, and they'd reload their guns, and they'd fire another shot, and they'd reload their guns, and they'd fire another shot, and then their general might yell, charge, and they'd take off across the field with their bayonets, stabbing each other and continuing to shoot at each other. That's how you fought, guys, and that's how the whole world fought at that time. That's how wars had been for thousands of years. And so the Patriots realized we're never going to win fighting that way. I mean, let's think about this. We have a bunch of rebels who don't really have a great military, who are struggling to eat. They're not really getting paid very much, and it's not looking good. They are not going to beat the world's most powerful military traditionally. So they have to think outside the box. So what they do is they use guerrilla warfare. And guerrilla warfare is sneak attacks. Okay? Remember, the British were used to meeting in a field and having almost a predetermined, like a pre-set up battle, right? So this is where, if you look at the second bullet, small groups of soldiers harass or launch surprise attacks on the enemy and then suddenly disappear. So I want you to close your eyes and I want you to think in your mind about a cotton field. So cotton plants are usually 3 to 4 feet tall, so they're pretty tall. And I love seeing cotton fields because when that cotton blooms, it's like flowers of cotton just kind of flowing off. So think of it's a plant with cotton balls. Think about cotton balls all over it. And in the middle of that field, you have crouched down about 30 or 40 Patriot militiamen. And they're patiently waiting. And coming down the road, you have 10 horses with carriages on the back, and they're transporting important British papers, and they have a couple important British officers with them, and they're just going along their day. Can you see them in your head in their red coats? And then all of a sudden, out of the field pops up these Patriots. Oh my gosh. And they start shooting at the British supply chain, and they're totally taken by surprise. Open your eyes. That's what guerrilla warfare is. And it totally took them by surprise. And the coolest thing about this, guys, is that the best militiamen were, guess where? Right here in South Carolina. And if you look at the screen right here are the 3 of the most important. Thomas Sumter, he's known as the Gamecock. Yes, guys, this is where the South Carolina Gamecocks get their mascot from. He is the original Gamecock. We also have a Sumter County. Then we had Andrew Pickens, and he fought mainly in the upstate. He was nicknamed the Wizard Owl. Clemson University is actually in Pickens County, named for him. And then my favorite, Francis Marion, from right here in Berkeley County. And we also have Marion Forest. We have Lake Marion. There's a Marion County. There's a Francis Marion University. So he is very well known in our area of the world. And his nickname was the Swamp Fox. Ashley Ridge High School, they're the Swamp Foxes. And that's who they're named for, is Francis Marion. So we're going to talk a little bit about these guys. I also have some books in the library about them. When I tell you they're interesting, they're really interesting. Oh, I love Francis Marion so much. So let's look here. So here I have a map, okay, from Charleston. So remember, Charleston had been taken over, right? The British were in control of Charleston. And then way up here, if we were to drive this, it would take us a little over 2 hours to drive up to this town called Camden. It's not huge even today, but back then it was an important Patriot outpost. So the British controlled Charleston. The Patriots still controlled Camden. And so the British are going to try to make their way up to Camden. And so this route is where you're going to see a bunch of militia attacks, surprise attacks. And if you look at the route this takes, it goes right through Berkeley County, guys, where we are. This whole area right here is Berkeley County. So Francis Marion plays a huge role in this, and I love it. And you can see all over Berkeley County those historical marker signs that talk about Francis Marion was here and Francis Marion did militia warfare surprise attacks here. And it's really, really cool to just all this history right here where we live. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Francis Marion, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about who he was from a story, my favorite story about him, and it's a true story. And this painting here that you see on the screen was painted as a way to remind people of how great of a man he was. So here you have Francis Marion here. And these are some of Francis Marion's men that fought for him. They didn't all have uniforms. The militiamen, they weren't official patriots, so they weren't always in the blue coats. They were in whatever old uniforms they had or regular clothes even. And here you have a British officer. Of course, the red gave him away. So here's what happened. Francis Marion and his men lived in the woods for months and months. And they really ate whatever they could find. And at this time, especially here in Berkeley County, one thing they could find to eat were sweet potatoes. You know, sweet potatoes are potatoes, but they're that orangey potato. They grew wild here, everywhere. And so Francis Marion decides to arrange a prisoner exchange with this British officer. So the plan is to invite him for dinner. They would talk, and Francis Marion would say, I've got 5 of your men, and I'll give them back to you if you give me 10 of my men, or whatever it might be. And so the officer accepts. He comes, and Francis Marion says, well, here's dinner. And if you look at the table, you have a bunch of sweet potatoes. And the officer is really taken aback by this. You know, this is all you eat? This is all you have is sweet potatoes? And Francis Marion looks at the officer and he says, yes. And this is what we've eaten for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for months. Now, I love sweet potatoes. Love them. But I don't think I would love them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for months and months and months. Here's what happened. This British officer right here, he actually went back to his commanding officer, the man in charge of him, and he said, send me back home, transfer me, I'm done. We will never beat these peasants. Because he realized that the Patriots had something the British soldiers did not, and that was heart, and it was drive, and it was a cause, right? They believed in what they were fighting for so much that they were willing to live in the woods for months, doing sneak attacks on British soldiers, eating nothing but sweet potatoes. And that British officer realized, we don't really care. Like, we're here because it's our job and the king told us to come here, but I want to go back home to my family, right? And this is the most important thing for you guys to understand, is the reason why the main reason why we were able to beat the British is because of the heart, because we kept going. We didn't give up when the going got tough, right? You hear that saying a lot. They didn't give up when they wanted to give up, when they wanted to stop. So that's huge. And I love this story because it exhibits that. It gives us such a great example of that. You can actually go and visit Francis Marion's grave. I've been there and I'm going to show you some pictures that I took from there. So, Francis Marion is actually buried in Upper Berkeley County, not too far from us. So, here you can see Westview Elementary School on the map, and it's about an hour drive, and you go all around Lake Moultrie up here to Belle Isle Plantation. Now, Belle Isle Plantation is not the place where he lived, it was one of his family members' plantations, but his plantation was actually over here, and it's now under Lake Marion. So here's an interesting fun fact for you. Every lake in South Carolina is man-made. Did you catch that? Every lake in South Carolina is man-made, and they were not made until the 1900s. And it's really interesting to read about. This is kind of a side note, but they dammed up the rivers, right, along the way to make these lakes. Before they did that, there were towns under these lakes in some places. And so you can actually take scuba gear and see remnants of old towns underneath some of these lakes. And so Francis Marion's plantation is under Lake Marion. So they moved his body to where I think it's his sister's plantation, is Belle Isle Plantation. So let's visit his grave. So I drove out there. I'm going to close my picture down here so we can read this. And this is the introduction. It's at the very end when you turn off the main road. And it says Belle Isle Plantation, burial place of General Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, famous partisan warrior of the American Revolution. So we said militia warfare, guerrilla warfare. A third word for that is partisan. A native of Berkeley County, South Carolina, born 1732, died 1795. Our band is few, but true and tried. Our leader, frank and bold. The British soldier trembles whenever Marion's name is told. And that's from a famous poem that was written about him. So you drive down this road. As you can tell, it's literally in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing there. And you get to the end of it, and there's a historical marker there. And it tells us about Francis Marion, that he's buried in this area. And then over is a small family graveyard. And this right here is Francis Marion's tomb. He's buried underneath in the ground there. And then his wife is buried next to him. And then other family members are buried in other graves back here. And so it's really awesome.
By mid 1778, British
Sorry about that.
troops.
It's really awesome to see. And so again, it's not too long of a drive. And they do some cool stuff up there. They do some different ceremonies up there pretty frequently. So it's pretty awesome. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. I hope you enjoyed that talk about partisan warfare and militia warfare. It's really amazing to read about. So I can't wait to share the next lesson with you.